Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and in this video we're going to be putting Cygnar into Mercenaries. For the Cygnar side, I had pulled their Facebook group, and out of the options I had given, Major Beth Maddox overwhelmingly won the poll there. So she was supposed to be in the last battle report that I had posted, putting Karchev into Doomshaper 3, but some problems with the Postal Service ended up putting that off. So I needed to figure out what to throw Maddox into, and I have a Rulik army that's been sitting around, and I figured I'd get it on the table. The Rulik portion of Mercenaries has been a long-time favorite of mine, and even though I'm not bringing a lot of the new pieces that the Theme Force has gotten access to recently, I still think the list is quite effective. Ossrum is one of the best generalists in the game, and the pieces that you can bring into the Hammerstrike Theme Force are quite self-sufficient. Anything that Ossrum ends up bringing for them, the pieces end up enjoying, but it's not something they need in order to do their job. I think one of the things that looks the most out of place or might catch some people by surprise here is the Avalancher being jack-marshaled by Thor. Now, Thor has received quite a few changes over the years that have knocked him down quite a bit, but I do think that the updates that got made in Mark III to Jack Marshals with the drives really make the Avalancher shine when he's under Thor. I think it's a strong piece, and even though it's a really expensive package at 19 points, I think it can get a lot of work done and definitely makes it feel like those 19 points aren't ill-spent. And a lot of it comes from just the overall efficiency that the list has on its own, like each individual piece. You don't feel like you're missing that 19 points. And again, I do feel like that Avalancher does a lot of work in this list. For the Maddox list, I've opted to bring her in Strom Division. I feel like she's a really good generalist for Cygnar and has a lot of tools that this theme force appreciates. We take things like the Stormblade Infantry and put Dauntless Resolve on them to make them extremely survivable, and when you stack that with Unyielding, they become quite difficult to get rid of. And we have 2 units of Storm Lances in here because the list kind of lacks projecting threat ranges, but when you have Storm Lances, you don't really care too much about that since they threat quite far. We also have access to Snipe, and almost everything in this list has a gun of some variety, so having Snipe on some of those pieces can end up giving you some extra abilities to scalpel when your opponent might not think you do. Also, it's not terrible to get Snipe on something like a Sentinel just to throw some extra shots around if you have no better options. And Maddox's feat is also kind of a scale tipper, so you're playing a really honest game up until you hit that feat, and then it's just trying to eliminate as much as you can and throw the scales of attrition in your favor. I think that a lot of people end up overlooking Maddox as a Warcaster because Cygnar first has access to some phenomenal Warcasters, and they can play quite a tricky game on their own, but also the Battlebox casters just kind of get branded as being some of the least powerful in the game, and I just don't think that's correct here for Maddox. I think she has a lot more value than people give her credit for. So there's 2 things I have to apologize for right away. First is the camera angle. I must have knocked the camera as I was passing between the 2 spots, but I think it gets fixed about halfway through, so hopefully it doesn't mess with you too much. The other thing is you'll notice there's a gaping hole where Ossrum's objective should be. By the way, they both took the treasure chest. That'll come back again later as well. It was usually when I prep for these games, I play one off camera just to kind of get the gist for the way everything goes, and then after that I play again to record so that there isn't something that's forgotten or something, so just so that mistakes don't happen as much. So that's what happened here. The objective had left in the previous game and I just forgot to put it back, but it'll be here soon. Other than that, it's just I'm unpacking Ossrum, getting out all the upkeeps. I believe the artillery has fire for effect, the one that's on the top side by the house there. Uh, uh, Harlow has snipe. With as many shots as he has, being able to affect that wide range of the table really feels good right now. And fire for effect on the artillery just feels good. So those can get switched along later, but I feel like Harlow having as many shots and as being as accurate as he is allows him to really kind of dictate what my opponent or what what Maddox is going to do here. I'm getting ready with the Forge Guard in the middle to unpack them after feet. And this way I also don't have to worry too much about any weird E-leaps kind of centering in on Ossrum. I don't want to take any early damage on him because the more damage he takes in the early game, the less comfortable he gets kind of getting into the middle in the late game portion. Other than that, just getting Jax positioned in the far zone to kind of start combating these Storm Lances that are coming in on the flank. So I keep calling her Sloan. It's because she's got like a similar haircut, and it's always just gonna mess with me. But Maddox ends up starting out with all of her upkeeps going. I think it's every single one she has goes out. We've got Snipe on Laddermore, which seems weird, but having the Lightning Generator means that I might be able to punk some Forge Guard early. So that's why I've got it set out on her. Assail gets up on the Stormclad, and then Dauntless Resolve. Kind of its home is going to be that unit of Stormguard or Stormblade, Stormguard. I always mix up those two. There's so many Storm names in Cygnar, and there will be a lot of me referencing the stats because this is probably the third game I've ever played with Cygnar. So I have to end up looking at a lot of the nuanced stats that you don't really get to pick up through your first playthroughs. Otherwise, for the Stormlance's position, I just want to stay away from getting hit or getting a couple of them clipped by that Avalancher AoE. I don't want to have all my Stormlances getting knocked down. They also have Arcane Shield from the Journeyman, so I feel like they're pretty safe against all those gun bunny shots. They are boosted, but I'm hopeful in that they don't just start boxing horses left and right. The other set of horses are going to kind of funnel around the building in between this Ironclad here. I think that they're just hoping to bully that side of the table a little bit, and Acosta takes position behind the house. So I always have a strong debate of whether to feat on turn 2 with Ossrum or not when I can't connect. Like, I'm not going to get any meaningful charges here. Sloan's done a good job of staying out of a lot of those threat ranges, but it looks like I'm just missed a quick thing here. One of the gun bunnies on the outside took down one of the Storm Lances, and the rest of them are lining up to try and hope to do the same. They come up decent for the most part. And if you're new to Warmachine or Mercenaries in general, these are the, I think it's the Grunback Blasters or Gunners. The Gunners are the ones that shoot the one-shot. Blasters shoot the AoE. They kind of look like little bunnies, so I think most people refer to them as gun bunnies. I do think they are the cutest warjack in all of Warmachine. They kind of remind me of the little robots from Batteries Not Included, so they definitely hold a special place in my heart along with the rest of the Rulik everything. So I think I'm really just leaning in on trying to get as much work out of these powerful shots as much as I can. The Stormlances are definitely well poised to do a lot of work to these little jacks. The just the POW 16 being dice off 2 and the damage grid on the blasters and gunners not being that impressive means that one hit can usually take out their cortex or their head, and if those go down, the Jack's basically worthless outside of just being able to utilize unstoppable force. I did try to take a shot into the Ironclad I think it was the Ironclad and not the Stormlance, but that was from the artillery crew, or the Horgenhold artillery crew, I think is what they're called. But that one ended up missing. It might have even just been into the Stormlance, hoping to try and get that last one. The building on the Cygnar side kind of makes it so that those Stormlances had to wrap around and kind of expose themselves to a lot of my shooting early, so it wasn't the greatest place for them to be. I mean, it's not the greatest place for them in general, but they made their choice, and it didn't seem to work out too well for them. Next up, I believe I've taken Holden here, and or Harlow Hold'em High is his name, and started popping some shots at Savio. I think we leave Savio on 1. The shooting, like, he's with Ghost Shot, he's pretty well poised to be able to hit Savio and take him out behind that wall, or behind the building, but I just come up short a couple times, and it doesn't work out too well for him. My next thing here is trying to figure out what to do with this driller. The drillers are pretty offensively nutty when you have the feet up. I mean, they drift forever. Now I know that looked weird, but the Ironclad's goal or intention when moving up, because I had put down the tape measure when I moved him, was to not be within 11 inches of that driller. So when I put down the widget, I noticed that I was in 11 inches, and I decided to just walk the Ironclad back, just because he shouldn't have been able to make that, since the goal was to stay out of 11 and not just give up a heavy right away under Ossrum's feet. The thing about, I think from the Cygnar perspective, the thing about Ossrum's feet is, if you can make it as less offensive as possible, it is kind of better that way. Since he has a speed buff and an armor buff, it's like a dual purpose feat. He can use it to be offensive and set the turn up for being defensive. It's just one of the really great things about Ossrum. But if you can make it so that Ossrum doesn't get to capitalize on that offensive power, then it works out pretty well. You're kind of lowering the efficiency of his list. So the Forge Guard kind of go in Operation Jam. While they're in Wall of Steel up front, they're sitting at Armor 21 under Ossrum's feet, so they will be kind of a pain in the butt to get rid of. The Cygnar list has the juice to do it, especially if Maddox decides to respond by feeding herself to kind of mitigate the armor buff. Then that just means they're they waste their feet to put a bunch of attacks into the Forge Guard, because for the most part, my Ossrum side is trying to stay out of a lot of those threat ranges. On the bottom side, I have a lot of these Stormlances are dangerous and scary. They could really just collapse that whole flank under her feet, shooting at or coming in at POW 19s, which isn't something that I want to deal with. The artillery ended up taking shots first and missed, and now we've got a gun bunny that just blows up the damage roll and just rips an arcane shielded Stormlance off the table. We have a couple more, so they decide to take some shots. I figure roughly it should take 2 maybe to kill a Stormlance, but I don't expect to do that much damage with them. But the other gun bunny just kind of keeps up with the trend over here and rips another Stormlance off the table, so they're looking really good in terms of lessening their impact, because right now there's 3 left, and I do expect the Avalancher to be able to take one out on his own. So we get I think we're in the Avalancher shot now, because he did the take aim drive, which when he aims he gets +2 to damage, and then Thor came up and tuned him up, and that ended up dropping Stormlance at dice -4, I think. And then the last blaster, or the last gunner, goes up and doesn't do anything to the other Stormlance, so I get to take advantage of that. I do reposition the Avalancher just as part of the theme benefit. I think during turn 1, I didn't explain that either, that one of the really big important deals with Hammerstrike is, number one, you get plus 2 inches on your deployment. It's one of the few theme forces that still allows for that. And then the other one is getting repo on your heavies. So right before we left the Mercenary turn, you saw that the last Gun Bunny blew up another Stormlance. So now there's just one Stormlance running out there, and that is nowhere near as dangerous as the 5 that were sitting over there. From the Cygnar perspective, I expected to maybe lose 2 of those, possibly 3 with the Avalancher shot. But the Gun Bunnies had to roll pretty high in order to drop those Stormlances just one by one. So it was very unexpected, but I have to just kind of recover from it as much as I can. The Stormlances in this list bring a lot of offensive power, and they're extremely effective under the feet, but now I'm only down to 1 Stormlance in each unit, and that means I've got to really kind of punch up for the rest of the game, and given the way things are positioned for me, it's going to be difficult for things to kind of switch perspective, because the goal was to get the Stormclad kind of in the center, but things didn't quite work out the best for him. So I think over here I'm just trying to unpack the the rest of my storm units to deal with all of these Forge Guard, because I do want to try and have I don't want to leave many Forge Guard hanging around. They do quite a bit of work, and even though my armor gets pretty high with the Storm Guard, Storm Blades, they don't appreciate getting hit by Weapon Master swings. So I ended up using the Stormguard Captain first, and he took out 1, which was not too difficult for him, being a POW 13 Weapon Master. So next up I have Dreyfus walk up and then get into the back of some of the Forge Guard. My hope, my super hope here is to have him take one out with the shield, which I'm crossing my fingers for. But at POW 9, it's not likely to happen, and definitely does not happen. So now I got to take the big lance into him, and that does pull the Forge Guard off, so that's not a problem. The reason why I had to walk and jump over here was because the Ironclad kind of blocks my ability to charge through things. So the placement of the jacks in that house kind of shrinking down my workable area is a little bit more on the difficult side. The Ossrum list isn't as wide, even though it's got quite a few models in it, but the Cygnar side is kind of getting pinched into the middle here, and it's difficult to unpack. Next up, Laddermore ended up walking up and taking some hits into, or I think she charged. She barely had enough to charge just to try and get a Forge Guard fella out of there, and then had enough to repo back and kind of make room for the Ironclad to kind of unpack. My goal with him is to try and get a sail juggled over to him so that he can go up and take out a driller, and then that way at least I don't have to worry about a heavy coming in and starting to wreck things up, and then Ossrum has to deal with a heavy with not a ton of ways to get rid of it without having access to his. Next up, I think we're taking some shots with the Sentinel just to try and do some damage to some of these gunners that are in the zone, because as they start to wrap around, they're going to be really difficult to deal with, and I do have to respect Unstoppable Force just being able to clear zones. Thankfully, Ossrum no longer has a way to give them Pathfinder, so that Force is going to be a pain in the butt. However, if you're paying attention to the way the table's laid out and where that Stormclad is, it's also not great for him. He's got quite a few he's got quite a few he's a lot of points. I'm sorry if I'm off a little bit here. In the city I live in, whenever it's noon, the fire alarm goes off. So I'm sure there's a reason for it. It has something to do with farmers, but it always catches me off guard, and I could just edit it out, but we're just gonna work with it. I think it's just a little bit of a funny thing. So now I'm trying to figure out what to do with this stupid Stormclad, because he's definitely one of the most offensive pieces in my list and definitely has the most value or the potential to swing the game in a weird way right now, but he just isn't doing anything. Doesn't have anything to do. So I think I just ended up aiming to shoot down a Forge Guard, but since I must have not done accumulator right, because he should have been able to boost the hit and the damage, and it just didn't work out for him, so he didn't take down any Forge Guard. Next up, Maddox is going to walk over to where she can get to the Ironclad and put a sail on it, and then she feats. This is going to allow me to get a lot of work done with the Storm Blades, and the Ironclad should be able to take out the Driller no problem. Next up, we end up charging the Stormlance into a blaster, just to try and get some much-deserved vengeance after watching his entire unit die. And he does quite a bit of damage to the blaster that he charges. I don't quite know if we completely take it out. I think we leave it on just a couple more boxes. Yeah, he's got like 5 boxes left, even though he blew up damage roll. I decide to beat back just a bit, only to engage the other ones, because the blasters, they have the half-inch reach bash weapon, which is a big deal, but I just don't want to have to deal with them so much, being able to walk around doing whatever they want. So I decide to try and engage some of them this way. If Ossrum wants to get rid of them, he's got to put up an unstoppable force. And if there's one thing that Ossrum is, it's focus starved when it comes to wanting to do everything he has to do, keeping things up and allocating the jacks when he needs to. So I think we're just trying to do some work with the other Stormlance that's up in the side. I'd like to get rid of this blaster. Yeah, I'd like to get rid of this blaster because it's not completely chunking up my charge lane for the Ironclad, but you'll see that I beat back and repositioned kind of out of order here. I thought that beating him back would give me a better landing spot for the Ironclad. After looking at it for a while and trying to figure out if I had anything else to get into that blaster, I'm starting to realize that beating back the gunner, I'm sorry, it's a gunner, beating back the gunner kind of put him in a spot where the Ironclad 100% will not be able to get in on that driller. There's just nowhere he can fit. So I think if not soon, eventually in a little while here, I end up trying to fix his positioning, or at least I rewind the beat back a little bit to make sure that the Ironclad can fit to where he goes. So we have the intrepid Journeyman Warcaster with his Rat 4 gun aim and shoot into the one Forge Guard that he's barely got line of sight to. He hits, and then he boosts the damage roll and ends up pulling one of them out of there. So Dreyfus can't get one with his shield, but the Journeyman can sure pop one with his hand cannon that he just picked up yesterday, apparently. Rat 4 is just such a screwball-y stat for him. It's like they've focused more on teaching him how to use jacks instead of teaching him how to use the hand cannon that they strap to the side of him. So it looks like the Gun Bunny redo is going to be a little bit later coming up. But right now, it looks like the Stormblades are going, and I wanted to try and find ways to clear out more of them so that I could bury a little bit deeper into some of the Forge Guard back here. But with Tactician and being able to cleverly block line of sight to some of these Forge Guard, they're unable to get all the free strikes that they want to get. So I'm able to charge past them while they don't have line of sight to me and get into some of the backline Forge Guard. And that works out pretty well for me in general, just because I want to, like I said, limit the amount of Forge Guard that are left over back here that can charge into some of my more valuable targets. I also have to try and respect scenario with the Cygnar game. I think I've got a decent setup with the flag. It's behind a forest, and there's a Squire sitting on it. There's a Sentinel that's contesting the zone and sits at armor 18 or something like that, 18 or 20, I can't remember. But he's got a good stat line. He's got a lot of boxes for a light warjack. Playing so much Khador, you don't really get to experience the light jack chassis, but I think the Sentinel for 8 points is a pretty healthy jack that can hold down his own pretty well. But as long as that driller's kind of threatening from the outside or the avalanche are there, I don't think he's the safest, but he'll at least be difficult to deal with. So I start plowing through Forge Guard and flinging my dice all over the place because that's just how I am when it comes to throwing dice around. I have a dice tray, but I just would like to get a camera on it, which means I just need to figure out a better setup in here. But dice trays help me have something to throw at, so I don't just start plastering the area with dice or chipping models and stuff. But in the comfort of my own home, I will throw my dice where I like. This is, I think I missed just the point where I moved the blaster back, or the gunner back. I was just, this is it was not a good call, so I decided to rewind it back to not totally screw over the Cygnar turn. I think this is where I had the Puppet Master objective go onto the Ironclad in the maintenance phase. It's always hard to remember when that stuff happens, but it was a good thing because the charge attack missed on double ones and then ended up hitting to do a massive amount of damage to the driller. I think from where we're at, we're barely under Maddox's feet. So with Ossrum's feet up, we're doing dice damage to that driller, and it shouldn't be too difficult to take him down. But I'm on my last focus, and there's 2 boxes left. So I'll 100% get the jack, but it got pretty close there, and if I didn't have that Puppet Master objective kind of set on the Ironclad, it could have not gone super great for him. So Maddox had scored 1 point at the end of that one, and Ossrum has nothing just yet. So I start out the turn by throwing out a shot with, I believe, my fire for affected artillery that's up at the top. I think I was looking for crits or something like that, and now I'm trying to check stats. I think it's trying to shoot into the Ironclad just to try and take some damage out of it, and at POW 14, we end up doing a big chunk to that Ironclad. It's just not in a spot where we take out any of the systems, which it would have been nice to grab movement or something like that just to make things easier for the rest of my hits. Even though I shouldn't have a problem hitting it with anything, it just is nice to be able to drop a system while you're at it. That sometimes you, especially against lists that don't have repair or ways to heal their jacks back up from afar, sometimes just crippling the right systems means that you don't have to pay attention to that jack anymore. It's just more of a pain in the butt than anything. And now here's where I finally put out my objective, because I was like, oh, I can Puppet Master something. So I think I might have Puppet Mastered Ossrum on this one, and you'll see me adjusting kind of his placement because I think I had him in a way where he was standing on the objective. But that's the secret tech to win against yourself, is to just not put scoring elements out there until later when your opponent's, like, which is yourself, doesn't pay attention to them. So I think now we're just using Harlow to shoot into the Ironclad. I think we popped a shot into Acosta, who had, I think, run up to the side of the zone. And since we drop Acosta without many issues, then that allows us to Swift Hunter onto the flag so we can score that. And then I think I ended up just putting a couple more shots into the Ironclad and just chipped it up a little bit. And I'm running out of good attacks to put into that Ironclad. My Forge Guard are positioned in a way where they can see it, but I would prefer to not have to unpack them into that Ironclad. I'd rather throw them up into the Stormblade so I can start doing work to them and making sure they have something to choke on so they don't go back any further or push any further into the middle of the table. But sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. Next up, the Driller walks and decides to punch the Storm Lance off the table. I need to get these gunners freed up so they can try and put some work into this Sentinel. I would like to try and score the zone and find a way to get that Sentinel off the table, and I think there might be a way for me to grab it if I energize her and then walk over and then shoot around the forest. But I don't know how likely that is to happen. This artillery misses its second or third shot in a row now. I think it's its second shot. Yeah, every shot it has taken so far it has missed. So the scatter happened and landed on the Squire, which was nice, but I think I only did a couple damage to it, which was unfortunate because if the drift could have just taken him out of there, then I could focus a little bit more on having to deal with just the Sentinel, which isn't the easiest thing in the world because it is quite a tough jack against shooting. But it just means that I don't have to worry about coming up short on killing the Sentinel and not being able to get the Squire out of there. But it is what it is. Fire for effect on that probably could have helped out a lot, but I like fire for effect where it is right now. I think next up we're just using blasters to shoot, or maybe not blasters, but we use Thor to go up to the Avalancher, and then the Avalancher took a shot, knocked it down, of course, and did a decent amount of damage to it. You can see by looking at the grid on the Sentinel, there's not a ton of boxes left for his arm, so I'm hoping that I can try and clip that with one of these blasters right away. The blaster that just walked up only had, I think the Storm Lance really jacked it up, so I just wanted to get within 4 inches of the flag to contest with it and not really do much of anything else. But the next gun bunny blows up the damage roll and takes out that shield, so now we're coming up with the other ones, hoping that we can grab the rest of the Sentinel off of there. And their damage rolls are pretty respectable. It's dice off 4 now with that with the shield out, so there's not much left for the Sentinel up there. So I think the blasters end up not having too much of an issue taking him off, and it was mostly in part due to the Avalancher being able to do so much work there. So if the Horganhold artillery ended up connecting, there's a chance I could have just come up around with a blaster and just shot the Squire off. But now I'm looking at some options of getting a different blaster into the forest. That's why I put the Sentinel there as kind of like a proxy to see, if I energize her up, can I walk forward and just shoot the Sentinel off the table? And based on what I'm looking at, it seems like I should be able to do it. So I end up energizing. I move Ossrum up a little bit to catch as much as we can. Maybe I didn't move him up first, but the one blaster that's the green-based one is a little bit out of range, so he is not able to do so. I decide to try and I look at the options of charging Ossrum into the Ironclad just to get that out of there, but I feel like having my back turned to the rest of my opponent's army means that Ossrum probably dies that turn, since he spends most of his turns not camping anything really. I did get Bullet Dodger up on myself at some point. I don't know when that happened, but I probably missed calling it out. So far he's put the Bullet Dodger up and Energizered. We haven't flopped any other upkeep so far, and I think we took a hand cannon shot at one of the Storm blades, and I don't know if we missed it, or no, I think it was we took a shot with his hand cannon at the Ironclad just to put some extra damage into him. And that's probably what we're doing now. So with the Ironclad having, it looks like 7-ish boxes left, I need to try and get rid of it. It still has its good arm up, which isn't the greatest thing in the world. It's not going to have the easiest time hitting anything in that zone, but I would rather not have a heavy chilling out here than just letting it go and doing its own thing. So the Forge Guard, now I'm checking to see if that one Stormblade is going to be able to hit them with a free strike, and based on where he's at, it doesn't look like he'll be able to get them if they just charge sideways here. And their orientation was set up in a way to where they could still see the Ironclad and charge off in that direction. At dice -7, the first Forge Guard ends up rolling exactly that, so no damage there. But then the other Forge Guard ends up doing enough damage to pull the Ironclad off the table. So it was fortunate that I put 2 of them over there. When I had made that charge, I had thought about only putting 1 Forge Guard in there because it should be able to do it. But watching the hammer go kind of salty, I'm glad that I got 2 in there just to make sure that happened. So now I still have this middle blaster. I think it might be a blaster. I can't quite see. The screen that I record on is kind of tiny, or at least the preview screen is. So I think I maybe see a little canister, because that's the way you tell the difference between these. The gunner and the blaster have essentially the same exact gun on top, but the blaster has a little I don't know what you call them, but it's like the little circle cartridge of bullets. That thing just kind of gets glued on top of them, and that's how you tell the difference between them. And I think that one has a little cartridge on top of it. So I think I'm debating here whether the blaster goes up and takes out the Squire, or if the blaster goes up and tries to deal with the Storm Lance that's in the zone. Either way, I want to try and get points here. I'm going to score with Harlow. I'm going to deny the flag for Maddox, but it's between scoring the other 2 zones, and it looks like it's actually a gunner based on what I'm shooting here. So it moves over just to the middle to kind of body block for Ossrum and takes a shot into the Storm Lance. It hits fancy enough and then rips it off the table. So now I can score that zone, and there's not a whole lot in there for me to have to... There's not a whole lot for my opponent to be able to throw in there just to kind of... Or to throw in there trivially to take the zone from me, or at least contest it. So this way Ossrum isn't falling behind in points or anything like that. And now I'm running the other... This one is an actual blaster. So we just run, and we're able to snake around these things in a way and then get into the tactician bubble to where we can back out of the free strike range. But I just need to body block Ossrum. But instead of body blocking Ossrum, I run the blaster to just kind of get in the way of the Storm Lances charging, or Storm Blades charging into that other zone. So they're fine there. Laddermore decides to be the first one to unpack into the blaster in the middle, or the gunner in the middle, and her lightning generator leaps to the objective. I believe that I didn't roll for the D3 on this one, so I end up fixing that a little later. The gunshot doesn't do much of anything to the blaster, but it does end up doing a decent amount of damage to the objective, and that was the assault shot. So now we're into the charge shot, and the objective takes a few more points, and the lightning generator ended up leaping once to Ossrum and does 5 damage to him. So it's always nice to get that chip damage in, especially when you are playing against a caster that likes to be pretty far forward. That kind of scares them from getting anywhere in the middle of the table when they're, sitting on a lot fewer boxes. Laddermore otherwise doesn't do great on her charge attack, so that leaves the blaster without their head at least, so I don't have to worry about that gun, or the gunner without their head. But it doesn't get it out of the way, which is what I was kind of hoping to do here, even if it was a little ambitious at dice -2 to kind of rip it off the table. I'd need to roll. I think you can't do it. I think I was just underestimating the armor value on the blasters, but I don't believe that it's possible. I think you need to roll a 20 on the dice to one-shot it. So next up I have Dreyfus go in here. The hope is, again, I'm banking on this shield. I'm trying to pop the blaster, the blaster with the shield, and then pop the objective with his spear. That doesn't work out for him, so he has to use the spear into the blaster, but that does end up taking it out, so I at least get that done. And we also, through that process, we had the Stormguard Captain, or Stormblade Captain, charging up the middle too, so we ended up putting 3 high point solos into a very inexpensive jack just to get rid of it. I think my goal here was to try and get up on scenario just a little bit, or at least even it out so it wasn't going to be taken away from me so easily. And I was like, well, if I can get the gunner out of the way, or the gunner, then I can have some of these the Stormblades charge into the objective. So instead, I decide to have Maddox charge off into the corner and kind of get rid of this blaster that's blocking up these Stormblades. Now, their armor value is decent enough to where they really don't have to worry too much about a free strike, but I was hoping to try and pack some of these into that other zone so that I could contest it and stop Ossrum from just walking away on scenario. So we end up, for whatever reason, like and Maddox just isn't doing the work she needs to. She ends up missing a couple of her attacks, and I end up boosting the damage rolls because she's dice off 5, and those aren't doing super hot for her either. She's just not having a good time over here trying to get rid of this jack. She's doing a lot of damage to it, but I need it to physically not be there. And I also am running out of, I used all of my solos to get up in there. So now I think the Journeyman's going to come up onto the flag with the Squire, and I believe we're just putting Arcane Shield on himself. I thought for a minute that I was going to be shooting the gun into the gunner that's in the blaster that's in that trench, but in combat and with cover, you're not really going to do super hot in terms of shooting with a Rat 4 hand cannon, even if you have focus. I think I'd still be looking for a 18 or something like that, because those guys are defense 12 naturally. 16, I think. Not defense 16, but I'd need a 16 on dice. So I decide to unpack these Stormblades next, even though they're not going to be getting exactly to where they want to be. And so I've got the thing about these that kind of gets frustrated. They're a great unit. I really think they're cool. They're expensive and fragile, but I think with Dauntless Resolve and Iron Zeal, which I think I did last turn. No, it wasn't last turn. I think it's this turn is where I use Iron Zeal on them. I'm not 100% sure when that happens. But at any rate, they sit at a pretty high armor value. They've got tough too. So I think that with those things stacking up, they end up becoming a pretty valuable unit for Maddox to use. The other thing too is they just have so many attacks that they put out. They've got the charge attack, and then I've got to go back and forth, they have the assault attack that has a lot of different rules with the leader, since he has that little lightning rod thing, and then all of the storm gunners have other abilities too that end up making shots hit automatically. So they're a thick unit rules wise, but I feel like they do quite a bit of work, and they're definitely worth using. I can see the value in Storm Lances over them. I know that some people might leave these at home, but I really do enjoy the unit and find a lot of value in it, especially with someone like Maddox who can pump them up so much. But they do end up ripping off the objective and that jack, so they do what they need to, and then we're just going to run this Stormclad into the zone. So from the Ossrum side, I just kind of see that Maddox is hanging out here. She didn't quite make it into the trench due to placement, and I think it was that when I was playing Maddox, I felt like I was a little bit under pressure, so I wasn't thinking about what things were going to be like after, or how I needed to set myself up for the turn after this. But now, coming to the Ossrum side, I see that she's very much exposed to a lot of the shooting that I have, and we start off with the Horgenhold artillery, and they end up connecting with her and doing a ton of damage. I think we leave around 3 boxes after this shot is said and done with. And we've got Harlow over here. We've got just a ton of shots that are really accurate, and Harlow just needs to walk up into the clouds to see through to her. But we end up walking a blaster up, or a gunner, sorry. And we're going to just take a shot in with him real quick. And the attack ends up connecting, maybe? Maybe it ends up missing. It must have missed by just a bit here. So next up, I think Harlow's going now, and no, this is. When I saw that, I was like, what are you doing, Brian? Instead, Ossrum goes, and he's going to walk up to put Fire for effect on Harlow, because with those 4 shots and auto boosted, there's very little chance that Maddox walks away from that. But while I'm over here, I'm just going to use everything I can and take a shot at Maddox with my hand cannon as well. I got enough focus left to be able to do it after upkeeping a couple things. We end up crushing the hit, and then we have enough to boost the damage roll, and at dice minus 4 or something like that, we end up doing just a little bit of damage, but it is enough to wipe Maddox off the table. And that's Ossrum winning by assassination. So there were definitely some things I could have done differently from the Cygnar side. I think that Stormclad was really criminally wasted that whole game, just being behind the forest. I think if I would have deployed the min unit of Storm Lances behind that upper building and made some room for the Stormclad, it would have allowed him to just be a little bit more effective on that side of the table, and then maybe I could collapse that side, since one of them had, or the opposite side had, all those Storm Lances that really should have made it around. But I really am enjoying playing Cygnar, and I think that Maddox is a really powerful Warcaster, and I think people should look at her a little bit more seriously than what they do. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this battle report. The next one is going to be me actually playing against a real person. So I believe for that one, we're going to be unpacking some Circle into Grimkin. So that should be a fun one to check out, and we'll definitely look forward to making that one too. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this battle report, and we will see you in the next one.